For more on the story, I'm joined now by Christophe Ventura, who's an Associate Research Fellow in Latin American Studies at the IRIS Institute here in Paris. Thank you very much indeed for being with us.
Hello.
First of all, we've seen those extraordinary pictures of people out on the streets in favour and against. This is something that really divides Brazilians. The question is how it's going to divide members of the lower house. First of all, how do the figures look like they're stacking up for now?
Yes, absolutely. What is happening today in Brazil is sort of a very important polarization of the society between those who are in favor of the impeachment, who are rather, let's say, a middle class and upper middle class in the society, and much more popular sectors who are not especially defending Dilma Rousseff herself, but rather defending the democratical legality in the country, because they don't want the right to come back to the power when they lost the election less than 2 years ago with that kind of procedures. But so in the lower house, we will have a vote on next Sunday, and those who are in favor of the impeachment will need 342 votes in order to declare the impeachment, and then the Senate will be the last moment, and they will decide until May if yes or not the president should be impeached, and then we will have 180 days of process of trial, and then at the end, October, something like that, we will know what will happen at the end. And if Dilma Rousseff is impeached, she will be impeached for 8 years, and then since from May to 2018, Mr. Temer, the vice president, will complete the mandate. So it's a bit complicated.
It's an extraordinarily complicated tale. Also, listening to you, one can't help but think that this political instability, which is presumably crippling the country, is going to last, whatever happens, for many more months to come.
Yes, it's almost impossible to say what will happen. It's very uncertain because all the scenarios are possible. We have to understand that the political system in Brazil is very complex because we have 25 parties within the Congress, and they change all the time their alliance with the two main parties, which are the PT, the Worker Party, and the PSDB, the Social Democrat Party from the right, center-right. So everything can change because there is no ideological or political coherence. There is rather opportunistic and electoral alliances. So it's a sort of house of cards, if I can say, in the Congress. In the moment where the Lava Jato scandal has pushed this system in a sort of a self-cannibalization, I would say, because a very high number of people, of parliamentaries, are touched by this scandal, not only in the PT, but also in all the other parties. Let's imagine that, for example, the PMDB with Eduardo Cunha, who has pushed the impeachment procedure, is accused in this process, which is not the case of Dilma Rousseff or even Lula, who are still not accused, but he is accused. So we have a sort of self-cannibalization of a political system that doesn't work anymore. So what we have to expect, at least, is to have a more sane system for the future.
But perhaps, listening to you, then, that is the light at the end of the tunnel, or the silver lining around this particular cloud, that perhaps Brazil's political classes hadn't reformed, hadn't addressed the fundamental question of corruption, the redistribution of wealth, things that they should have tackled much earlier on and didn't when times were good. Now they're being punished for it, not in the polls, but by this broader, deeper crisis that threatens at least perhaps to clean things up looking ahead further in the future.
Yeah, because we have to understand that the key problem in this story, that the fact that the political system in Brazil is only financed by private sectors and firms. So you have no public financing of the political parties. So each candidate for each election is supported financially by firms and private sectors. So obviously it facilitates all corruption in all the system. So what should be the solution is to go out from this system in order to have a more financement of the political life in the country, and that's what the government should do, and that's what the PT didn't do. I mean, what people are criticizing for the PT, that they did not change the system. But the system is working for all the parties. That's what is complicated. So that's why I say generally in France, that's the Lavajato scandal is a bit like the ELF scandal we had in France 20 years ago. It's more or less the same story. So the challenge for Dilma Rousseff, the PT, and for everybody in Brazil is to change the system in order to have a more sane situation.
Of course, the trouble is that it comes at a terrible time economically for the country, adding political pressure onto economic downturn, which was already looking catastrophic. Presumably, the scenario for Brazil's economy is worse even now than it was before.
Yes, and that's another key problem in the problem. The fact that from 213, more or less, the growth failed, and it becomes much more complicated for normal people, for common people to live, because there is a degradation of the material conditions of existence. And before, corruption was still there, was already there. I mean, corruption in Brazil is in Brazil since Brazil is Brazil. But today, people are living in a very worse conditions, so they don't accept more that kind of situation. That's the problem. So today, the recession is very important in Brazil, less than 3% for this year and probably next year, because Brazil is dependent from its exportation of commodities. I mean, especially with China, was become the first partnership of Brazil in the last year. So Brazil is a bit prisoner of its situation of producer and exporters of commodities in a very depressed market in the international level, because of the consequences of the global crisis of the 2008 crisis. So that's the problem.
Thank you very much indeed, Christophe Ventura. Look there at the situation in Brazil, which will continue following, since we're expecting then a vote, you were saying, by this weekend in the lower house.
On Monday.
Sunday. In the lower house of Parliament. So we'll continue following, of course, events there and see how the figures indeed stack up. Thank you very much indeed.